going to say, good morning. It is Wednesday, March 29th, 2023, and this is the second half of the morning for the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. We're resuming our work on S-140, an act relating to energy storage, and want to welcome back to the committee Ms. Margolis. So thank you for adjusting your schedule and joining us a little late, since we're running a little long. So floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks to the committee. For the record, my name is Ann Margolis. I'm the Deputy Planning Director at the Vermont Department of Public Service. May I ask how long you'd like me to, I'm allotted here?
If you can aim for roughly 10 minutes, 10 to 15, does that work for you?
Yep, I'll do my best. Thank you. And I did prepare a document. I don't know if you all have that in front of you or are looking at it. I could share it on the screen if that's the easiest thing to do.
Let me see. I don't have one from the department, but if you stick it on, we'll make sure it's posted to the website. Do you want to run a PowerPoint or have us run a PowerPoint for you this morning?
Yep, I will go ahead and run it here.
Okay, great.
All right, can you see that all right?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Great. All right, thank you again for having us here today. My goal today is to provide a flyover of energy storage activity in Vermont for the past 5 years or so. In particular, since the legislature in 2017 directed the department to conduct a study on energy storage, I had hoped to provide you with a one-page overview of all this activity in the last 5 years. That ballooned into 14 pages. Because we have a lot of energy storage activity, that's what you have in front of me. And if you access it electronically, you'll be able to just click through this table of contents here and scroll around in the document. It's hyperlinked, and all of these bills and studies, et cetera, are also hyperlinked. So hopefully it provides a sort of a one-stop shop for you to see what's probably not comprehensive. It's definitely not a comprehensive overview.
Sure. No, but thanks for sending a document with live links, and we have that up on our website, and so everyone in the committee can also use that. Great.
Great. Thanks. And I will try to be quick, and you know, it's not that visually stimulating, but hopefully it has all the information that you need. The report that's referenced under section 1.1 here was the report that we were directed to initiate in 2017. That report was broad in scope and looked at things such as state, regional, and national activities, jurisdictional issues, benefits and costs of storage, and also we looked at the concept of procurement targets in that report as well. Many of these items are also sort of cross-referenced in S-140, so hopefully that report would at least provide some information that would inform any report that you might do. As a follow-up, the legislature then enacted Act 31 of 2019. That's referenced under section 1.2 here, which again, stakeholder process that directed us to come up with statutory language that would start to incorporate energy storage throughout Title 30. And finally, under Act 54, that incorporated those suggested changes in statute to incorporate energy storage more fulsomely into all the parts of Title 30, as well as some additional titles. It also directed the Public Utility Commission to initiate some rulemaking related to energy storage. So turning to the reports, this was the Act 53 report that we did in 2017. Again, benefits, costs, ownership options, pathways for promoting potential programs and policies to encourage storage, and recommendations. And in that report, you know, we looked at ultimately storage as a tool, a means to achieve an end, whether that end be resilience, affordability in terms of the benefits you can accrue by peak shaving, a whole slew of benefits, but really like what the goal is, what you're looking for. Storage is a means to meet that goal, but there's other ways to meet those goals. Storage can be compared against, for instance, flexible loads, even curtailment of overgeneration, in order to, say, achieve high levels of renewability, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, achieve energy resilience, et cetera. And specifically on the idea of procurement targets, you know, in that report, we specifically came to the conclusion and advised that procurement targets were not a good idea for Vermont, in part because utilities were already procuring storage, some of it owned by them, but actually not much. Much of it's under contract or owned by customers. So utilities were procuring storage without a mandate if it was the least cost solution to an identified need that they were obligated to meet as being regulated, vertically integrated utilities in Vermont's regulatory environment. Also, the focus on storage as the target presupposes that storage is the right solution to meet an identified need, such as resilience, such as reducing greenhouse gas emissions, such as shaving peaks, such as aligning load with renewable generation. Storage might be the right solution in some cases, but things like flexible loads, like deferring that EV charging Senator White was talking about, things like curtailment, those may be more suited to a particular problem at hand that a utility is examining, and the problem would be examined in terms of the particular costs and benefits of the particular solutions available to the utility at a particular point in time. And that's a constantly evolving and changing situation.
Sure. Ms. Margolis, quick question. So this, the Act 53 was 2017, right?
Act 53 was 2017. That was the end of 2017 was when we issued that report. Yes, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sure. And I'm just checking to what degree it's great that we have that information, and we'll certainly use that. I'm just wondering to what degree, do you have any comments on, it seems like it's a rapidly changing area. Is the report, aging well, or is it, I guess that's the question really.
Yeah,
Would you advise the committee any differently than what's in it now?
Well, I'm not going to say that things haven't changed since 2017. I would say we were nothing's changed in terms of understanding the urgency of, climate change. Nothing's changed in terms of generally the markets that are available to storage. Mr. Linsky-Paul mentioned FERC Order 2222. That is still coming into play and could have an impact on Vermont, but that's actually, we won't know for a little while whether that implicates, it would implicate, if any, utility Green Mountain Power. We don't know quite yet how that's going to play out. So that's something that won't be settled by the time a study committee could meet this summer or fall, most likely. So again, it's just the rapidly changing environment. I've also, I think we've talked before this committee about the renewable energy standard work that the department is leading, a big engagement effort with stakeholders this summer and fall to look at things like 100% renewable energy requirement or 100% clean electricity requirement, including things like looking at the granularity in space and time of renewable generation, and if Vermont potentially went to something more granular as a result of those recommendations, say with a clean peak type of concept, or even approaching something closer to hourly renewability or emissions reductions, there would be an automatic implication there for energy storage and other flexible loads. So that's another dynamic that's changing that could potentially put a study that would happen this summer and fall also out of date by the time those policies were implemented. So I guess I'm just pointing out there's a constant flux. And if we had set, if recommended a target in 2017, that could also be out of date by the time, this study rolled around. So locking into a specific target and presupposing we know what the future is going to bring in terms of cost benefits, we didn't know the Inflation Reduction Act was on the horizon, for example, is sort of always in there, looming in the background of these studies.
Sure, yeah, and I'm not challenging the report or recommendation. I'm just trying to understand the context. Like if we're reading it now, how do we make sure that we adjust for what's happened since 2017? That's all.
Yeah, and if we were part of any study group happening this summer and fall, we could probably shine a light on any of those changes that had happened.
Okay, thank you.
Let's see. So, you know, there's been discussion about procurement targets, and that's really a signal to industry to that Vermont's a friendly place for energy storage and that a lot of energy storage activity will be happening. I guess I just want to, in the next sections here, talk about how things have been going. Since we didn't set a target, have things been stagnant? Have we not seen much activity on energy storage? I would argue to the contrary. We've seen a ton of activity in spite of not having an energy storage target. For one thing, we did recommend changes that would ease the regulatory and provide certainty in the regulatory pathway for permitting of energy storage. I mentioned the commission's rules that they're working on right now. One is the interconnection rule, which is pretty far along in the rulemaking. That, for the first time, would explicitly incorporate energy storage and define it and enable some flexibility for the future for things like vehicle to grid energy storage. Then it also incorporates, there was commentary from and help from Interstate Renewable Energy Council in that rulemaking to really try to make storage fully incorporated and make sure that the unique characteristics of storage were being acknowledged in the rule. For instance, when the storage will start charge and discharge, so it's not always being examined by the utility for the worst case scenario. For instance, just when all the solar on the circuit's also discharging. The commission's also working on a rule specific to energy storage, which would, right now, it's only systems 100 kW and above that would have to go get a Section 248 certificate of public good from the commission. This rule would also kind of fill in the blanks for the smaller storage systems and prescribe things like fire codes, safety rules, decommissioning. What are we going to do with all of these storage systems at the end of their useful life? Other things we all have to think about, and it's important to the industry as well to understand what the rules of the road are. And then, the area where I would like to spend a lot of time, but will try to restrain myself, is all of the planning activity that's going on, both at the state level, the utility specific level, and also the regional and municipal level around energy storage. So the comprehensive energy plan that was mentioned earlier, there's a whole chapter devoted to grid optimization that delves into the opportunities and challenges of moving towards this highly distributed, highly renewable energy future. The challenges of which are myriad, and they're being addressed in a lot of different venues. Storage is in there, as are some of the other tools that I mentioned around integrating renewables, enhancing resilience, and reducing emissions. The Comprehensive Energy Plan, and that chapter in particular, also poses a lot of questions, many of which are policy questions that really could use a study committee. Not that I'm advocating for spending lots of your time on study committees, but there's some really knotty questions that are coming up around, in particular, cost allocation for grid upgrades to accommodate high penetrations of renewable generation, developing a framework for valuing and metrics for measuring the impact of resilience investment. What is this thing we call resilience? How is it different from reliability? Are we looking at storage for resilience? Are we looking at relocating lines out of the cross country onto roadsides, undergrounding? This is all parts of the solution suite that utilities are looking at and evaluating for least cost. But how do we measure, right? So speaking of resilience, the Climate Action Plan took a deep dive into electric infrastructure resilience in general, and electric sector resilience in particular was an area where the department was involved. Again, storage is mentioned there, as is the need for a measurement framework. I think there's a goal to have one in place by 2030. VELCO, the statewide transmission operator, addresses storage. Actually, they did a study looking at transmission level constraints to generation. And that study, which was a point in time study, found that potentially between 250 megawatt and 400 megawatts of storage, I believe this all assumes 4-hour storage, actually 5-hour storage, would be required to, potentially required to mitigate those generation constraints at the transmission level. And there's a wide range there because it really depends. The lower end of the range was if we end up siting solar more optimally from a locational perspective. So in areas of the grid that can handle it, that have headroom now of the transmission grid. The 400 megawatts of storage would be if we ended up just deploying future solar according to historic deployment patterns. So we would reach saturation in certain parts of the transmission grid earlier and more storage would be needed. And in a least cost planning framework, you want to evaluate, is it better to redirect the siting of solar and avoid 250 megawatts of additional storage? Or is it better to let the solar go where it may, according to other forces, and fill in the gaps with storage? Any additional cost is going to be borne by ratepayers. And as you know, we've been trying to talk about in net metering proceedings, et cetera, additional costs to ratepayers add to rate pressure, which we need to keep rates affordable so customers will electrify their heating and transportation, which is the areas where we have the biggest emissions coming from. So these least cost questions are important. They're important to achieving the state's climate goals, and they're important to evaluating storage against other types of solutions and deciding what is the ultimate goal. Is it renewability? Is it reducing emissions? Is it resilience? Is it all of those? The scope of this study may not be quite wide enough to look at all of those questions, and if you were to proceed with it, we would encourage you to widen it. I want to also just touch on some of the utility IRPs, which also start to look at what's the right amount of storage for us. Most of the utility IRPs end with a memorandum of understanding from the department. Even if they say we're going to look at the optimal amounts of storage in our system in our next IRP, which they have to happen every 3 years, they look out 20 years ahead. GMP and VEC, Vermont Electric Cooperative, just had IRPs that had memorandum of understanding with the department that require them in their next IRPs to conduct an analysis of the optimal power, energy, location, and size distribution of energy storage on their systems to do all of these things here. Resiliency, avoid infrastructure upgrades, lower peak related costs, et cetera. So you'll see that most of the utilities are kind of doing this planning work, which is again, a point in time look, but these are deep dive studies that are going to take several years and should probably be used to, at least as a reference point, to inform any discussion of any target. This was from GMP's 2018 IRP, and just it's an illustrative future storage portfolio. I think it looks at something like 100 megawatts of storage for different purposes. Their 2021 IRP didn't include such a table, but their next IRP will get very specific. Even the small municipalities are looking at deploying storage. The municipal utilities, some of them have power contracts, energy storage contracts, I should call them, energy storage service agreements with DeLorean Power to provide, they're looking sort of at the substation level for deploying energy storage projects. And utilities will all talk about the projects they're doing, but I just wanted to give you a sample of the way that they're taking a deep dive on storage and other flexible loads, you know, fleets of electric vehicles, thermal storage, et cetera, in their integrated resource plans. And the department's guidance for IRPs also ask them to go deep into their technology deployment flowchart. Like, how are you going to take the concept of storage from initial concept to execution, and what kinds of barriers are there in terms of, we've heard that even purchasing the software that would allow the utilities to dispatch storage to as a fleet, say customer-sited storage, to reduce peak-related costs, like a virtual power plant. There's economies of scale issues there for some of the smaller utilities. You know, every additional device would require a fee to be paid, and the utility could never actually save in that instance. So there are some needs there that we hope to have identified through the integrated resource plan process, and then potentially would inform things like funding requests. And I didn't want to, last but not least, I don't want to leave out the Act 174 regional municipal plans. We revised the standards for those plans in 2022, and it requires those land use plans to look at siting and policies for energy storage. Okay, so how are we doing in deployment? This is a list here of all of the storage that's deployed. So the deployed is not italicized, and then the italicized are projects that are in permitting or permitted. That total brings us to 68 megawatts of storage, 212 megawatt hours. Where does that put us in context? Vermont has generally been at the top of the heap, even when you add in some of our big neighbors, in terms of deployment of storage, both nationally as well as regionally. So looking at some of these requirements or targets or mandates for storage, you know, if you look at Vermont's 40 megawatts of currently installed storage, that's 3.7% of our 2022 peak. When all of those 68 megawatts I discussed above are built, that's going to be 6.3% of our peak. If you look at some of the goals for the other states, for instance, Mass's goal of 1,000 megawatts by 2025, they're currently at 2.4% of their peak if they have 330 megawatts installed now, and their goal of 1,000 will get them to 7.2% of their peak. We're really not that far off when you look at it from a percentage of peak perspective, and peak related costs are really where storage is at right now. Not saying there's not other value streams that will emerge, but that's the primary one. And then there's a ton of work that's going on around storage. We are preparing to issue, the department's preparing to issue a solicitation using ARPA funds for $7 million for an energy storage access program to support low and moderate income storage, municipal storage, and those platforms for utility, municipal and cooperative utilities that I was mentioning. There's ARPA funds going to BGS that will at least help municipalities evaluate storage for resilience. And the department has been working with utilities to submit a funding opportunity that would bring in another 55 megawatts of storage under the infrastructure law and coordinate Infrastructure Act and coordinate dispatch of that storage. Utilities are issuing RFPs. Again, this is not for them to own storage primarily, but to enter into energy storage service agreements with private companies. Efficiency Vermont is also looking at storage as part of their load management portfolio. Storage is eligible for tier 3 of the RES. I mentioned our RES renewable energy standard redesign stakeholder work, which could greatly inform sort of the role of storage there. And we're standing up a technical working group under the auspices of the Vermont System Planning Committee to look at things like coordinated dispatch. You don't want one utility dispatching storage to the detriment of another utility in the region, which could happen. You know, Vermont Electric Cooperative, they can talk about this themselves, but they have created a tool to understand when their storage dispatch strategy kind of breaks down, depending on how much storage another utility is dispatching to reduce their peak. I mentioned FERC Order 2022. A lot of stuff is happening at the region around storage. I think storage was a major component of a recent capacity auction. It's a huge part of their interconnection queue, like really big grid scale storage. And again, there's the federal investment tax credit, which was now for the first time available for standalone storage. And there's, you know, pretty big incentives if you meet certain wage requirements, sourcing requirements, et cetera, and even can be used by state and local governments, nonprofit entities. So that's just a flyover, and I really just hoping here to illuminate all of the activity. You know, in our view, the particular question being asked here has already been studied. The fundamentals may have shifted a bit, but the general idea of a procurement target that would limit the ability of utilities to kind of meet the legislature's goals, the climate and energy requirements in statute, the requirements for affordability, reliability, security, sustainability at least cost is potentially, you know, restricting that with a storage. Those could be decisions could be restricted with the storage target, and that could add costs or ratepayers and lead to suboptimal results. We ask you to consider these limitations and the studies that have already been performed. Of course, the department would be willing to assist a study committee that did proceed in any way, but we would ask you to recognize and be cognizant of the limitations that we have in actually trying to execute some of these activities, in particular, the renewable energy standard, stakeholder work, and hopefully a product that will be provided to you by next legislative session that will implicate storage. And appreciate your time today. Happy to take any questions.
Great. Well, thanks so much for the flyover of a rich resource. So there's a lot of good data there, and I appreciate that we just needed, I think for the most part, you're helping us become more aware of the whole landscape of information as opposed to like digging into it yet. So so that was very helpful, and it's your documents on our website, and we'll have hard copies for committee members who want to work that way. And I think thanks for teeing all that up and your patience in both waiting to get started and working in a pretty tight window to get through all that material. So thank you again. With that, we could go on to Mr. Catherwood. Good morning. Good to see you again.
Good to see you. Thanks for having me again. For the record, my name is Josh Caston with Green Mountain Power, Chief Innovation Officer at GMP. So I'll just quickly walk through. We're just going to quickly hit some of it. Probably a little duplicative of what Ms. Margolis just showed, but just what GMP has been doing in the storage space, in both battery, and then this morning I heard about other forms of storage, and just kind of hit there, and then quickly hit S140. I don't know if I need to say next slide or anything, but so really the next two slides, I mean, it's all about one of the key things for us right now is resiliency. We've been deploying storage for quite a bit of time. Mr. Alinsky, Paul, this morning, one of the first projects we worked on was with the Clean Energy Group and folks in Vermont, the Department of Public Service and the DOE to deploy storage in Rutland, Vermont. And that was the first battery to participate in the New England region in a number of markets and different things using batteries in a new way. Since then, we have deployed a significant amount of energy storage with some of the key financial benefits to customers being around peak reduction. And folks talked this morning about using batteries in lieu of peakers, basically as the system is the hottest days of the year, the coldest nights of the year, we can leverage the battery storage to reduce how much energy we need to purchase from the system. In turn, that saves our customers, all of our customers, substantial, and reduces the amount of carbon that we need in the system overall. So between the residential programs that we've been deploying and grid scale, both what's built and power purchase agreements that are being built now are about 73 megawatts of storage that's either deployed currently or about to be through some of our arrangements. About 21, probably closer to 22 now, is all small little batteries in homes helping to provide resilience there. And the biggest benefit of that program, there's a couple different ways that program works in terms of who owns the batteries or how customers take advantage of that program, but it does it in a way that we reduce the cost of the system for the customers by getting all those peak benefits we talked about, and the customer pays a small fee that essentially bridges the gap of what's left, so that we're able to do it in a way that other customers are not covering the cost. So it basically, that battery can cover a ton of its own costs through its benefits, then the customers have a small piece that they're picking up for the resiliency aspect that they're getting.
So all those batteries are managed by the GMP.
That's correct. Yeah. Yep. Through different software platforms. Essentially, if you look at slide, I'm sorry, I don't have a number on here. It says home battery programs at the top. Just gives a little bit deeper dive, just a view of what we do. So as the batteries are deployed, we can dispatch or discharge those batteries during the key times when we need them. We're doing a lot more than this now as well. We're using batteries to do things, something called frequency regulation. So in New England, there's a market to help manage the frequency of the electric system. And we can use batteries and they just cycle very quickly. Every 4 seconds, you can tell a battery to charge or discharge. That helps them manage frequency in the New England region. In turn, that produces value that we pass back to all of our customers. Back to just resiliency for a second. So GMP and other DUs here, but we've had four storms this winter that have been in the top 10 worst storms in the history of our organization. 4 different storms in one winter that have now been in the top 10 of storm impacts. As expected, what we're seeing as the climate is warming is that temperature threshold that causes heavy wet snow is happening more often. So we're moving. We need to move as quickly as we can to get more storage into homes. We have other work that we're continuing to do around resiliency and hardening of the grid. Battery storage in the customers' homes is a key resource that keeps the lights on when we need to get out there and restore during some of these heavy storm events.
Senator White.
Thank you, Chair Bright. So one of the things I appreciated about your deployment of the battery program has been something that I experienced personally, which is my parents-in-law were the first folks to get the Tesla Powerwall in Norwich. And it was because they are consistently the folks who lose power. So it feels like the money saving side of things is one that you are focused on because, how do I put this? They are less likely to call you to have someone come fix their power line if they still have power. So I appreciate that you've strategically worked on this program in areas where then you can prioritize a greater number of people getting power back. And then the kind of out in the woods folks who can use a battery, can still have their fridge going or their backup heat, they can wait a little bit longer. The urgency is not as great for folks who are out in the woods in the same way. So I just want to say thank you for that prioritization.
Sure. Yeah, and so that is a big key. I'll say the urgency is still just as great, believe it or not, but you're absolutely right in that if we know, and again, depending on how you manage the battery, if it's standalone with no solar, you can carry multiple days on that system. Pair it with solar, and you can continue to recharge and keep it going for a period of time. But it's a tool that we have today that we have not had up until the last decade.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I look at it is, our job as utilities deliver reliable energy, do it as low cost as we can and as low carbon as we can. And now we have a new tool to do that using storage that hits all of those things. It's an amazing tool. So that's why that's essentially what anchors all of our battery storage work, and it's going to continue. It's just how we continue to drive resiliency up for customers in the face of climate change and what's happening across our system with storms. How we keep driving carbon out of everything we do and everything help our customers do that, and how do we keep lowering costs?
Has there been any research to look at? And I didn't hear Ms. Margolis talk about either. Has there been any research that shows the fossil fuel savings that happen because what my parents-in-law used to do is run the generator compared to using the Powerwall?
Yeah, there is. So, and I can't state the numbers right now, but there's actually 2 key fossil fuel savings that we record essentially. One is the avoided generator running, and 2 is the avoided peaker plant in New England having to run. And that one through the Tier 3 renewable energy standard, we do actually calculate and produce a value based on that avoided carbon. So that's a big piece. And then as we think about in terms of a value stack, the resiliency is really a key piece. Reducing those peaks, soaking up solar generation during high solar times, we can leverage that to then avoid other grid. And then as we continue to electrify transportation and heating, doing so in a way that has storage in the mix is key to us continuing to run the distribution system as we expect. We're able to show that we can do all this electrification that we hope to help customers do without taxing the grid significantly because of the work that we can do with this system. I'll just hit, there was other forms of storage talked about earlier. Yes. So I think Hartford Pool, Senator White, you hit that one there. That's we have a couple programs, our flex load, we call it, and that's exactly thermal storage is a form of energy storage. We've been doing it with water heaters for decades. It's probably one of the first forms of demand response was, heating up water heater, turning it off for a period of time and letting that ride through a peak event, using the pool at the aquatic center. Number of larger commercial customers are participating in these programs as well. So we've got a number of megawatts now in our flexible load. Our ski areas are a big participant in those areas. Yeah, and just, in terms of S140, which is, so the one thing is we talked about, we're moving on storage regardless. We want to get it out, especially to customers on the resiliency side as quickly as we can. Maintaining flexibility in how that happens is key to us. That's something we would be looking at as if a study moved forward. And Ms. Margolis had talked about our integrated resource plan. We do talk a lot about our storage initiatives there and what we want to continue to do.
Questions?
Yeah, I was just, your slide on feedback on S140 just came up, so I'm trying to catch up
Okay.
and listen to you at the same time. So,
Yeah. So, again, the piece that's important to us, as I hit the three key, whenever we're looking at a pilot of any kind of program, it's always around, are we driving up resiliency, reliability, are we reducing cost, and are we reducing carbon? Those three, it's easy to do one of those things really well. To really balance, do all three well takes work and takes effort, and making sure you don't just go hard on one at the expense of enough driving up cost or actually having a carbon impact. Those three things kind of underpin everything we do around battery storage, and are going to continue to inform us as we look ahead and do this work.
sure. When Mr. Olympal was in, we were talking briefly about, is there ever a tension between trying to do greenhouse gas reduction over rate reduction?
Over which reduction?
Like to take pressure off ratepayers, like money savings to the system.
Well,
allow you to reduce rate pressure.
Yeah, it's interesting. They actually line up really well right now, I would say, in terms of, well, if we're reducing, the peak is a good example. And the peak is the most expensive and dirtiest time of the energy system in New England and probably elsewhere. When you reduce that, you're reducing the cost that's flowing to customers, and you're reducing the amount of overall carbon in the system. Those two things line up really well. And that's, as I mentioned, as we look ahead at electrifying, getting the transportation we need to the thermal sector, we're going to continue to leverage and need these types of systems to help us there.
One of the, I think, concerns when anyone considering creating an asset has to connect to the grid or to a distribution utility is interconnect, the rules and costs. And so can you say a little bit about to what degree, although GMP is already working in this area, is your distribution network open to private actors bringing in a resource, and how would they sell that into the system?
Yeah, so there's two pieces. There's the technical kind of interconnection piece. The answer is yes, and anybody can interconnect a resource to the system. The goal is for the smaller stuff, like in the homes, it should be as quick and simple as possible. That's how we've been doing it. I think under the storage rulemaking with interconnection updating that's happening, that's the intention, is to continue to have that be very streamlined, very simple. And then as you work your way up in system size, there's more study work we have to do to make sure it can interconnect safely and reliably. That process works pretty well, and I think we'll continue to. Then in terms of what are the different markets you can participate in, so we have our own programs, and I mean, ultimately, our goal is that it always makes more sense for you to work with GMP to interconnect your system and to get value for that system. So we do power purchase agreements as an example. So private storage developer cites a battery system, and we engage in a contract to produce value for customers and pay that developer. We've done RFPs, requests for proposals, for a certain amount of battery storage in key locations. You can also plug in and do certain things in the market as well if you desire, if that's something that you want to do.
Senator White?
Thank you, Chair Bray. Since we have you, and it's come up before, one of the questions that I think we hear from our environmentalist colleagues around battery storage is a concern of like the life cycle analysis of the batteries. And we had that came up briefly earlier in the testimony, but I'm wondering if you could speak to perhaps some of the, let's say, misinformation about battery storage and the life cycle, and the idea that I think is percolated in some areas that batteries are worse than not having batteries, that the carbon emissions impacts or even the inability to recycle the batteries is an issue. I wonder if you could speak to that from your perspective as a utility.
Yeah, so we had to, during a battery project we did a number of years ago, Panton, which is like a grid scale and now microgrid. As part of that permit, we did a life cycle analysis, which it was in 2018-ish, I want to say, or something like that time frame. I can, which looked at exactly that, the life cycle of the system, what is avoiding, how much fossil fuel, all of those things, and it was still a benefit.
Yeah.
I think there's this sense out there that a battery hits the end of its life and it's just done.
Yeah.
And that's rarely the case, right? I mean, you lose the, so a Powerwall, for example, they're guaranteed for 10 years, but they're going to continue to operate beyond that and continue to have some amount of storage. You start to deplete how much, some of an EV or something, but it's just really more, something else will probably fail on the EV or something, before the battery does. But there is recycling programs too, and I actually think the DOE is putting a considerable amount of resources towards centralized recycling programs also.
Cool. Thank you for that information.
Sure. Okay.
All right, Senator McCormick.
Thanks. Expanding the discussion even further. And I'm not sure the bill addresses this, but maybe we want to. The working conditions in Africa were certain essential elements of batteries are mined, which seem pretty horrific, the way I've seen them described. We have a position on that.
I mean, I know that one of the things, so we're probably talking about cobalt, just in the rare earth metals that are there. I'm certainly not an expert on that. I know that there is work, because I see them all the time in other chemistries, other technologies for storage. I think part of the future is there's going to be other things besides lithium ion as well. So that's what I pay a lot of attention to. And we, as GMP, the thing we're always trying to do is find, the newest solution, different technologies, and really test them out, prove them out, see if we can work them into the system. So we're always looking at those options, but I don't know. Yeah, we don't know a ton about.
Yeah.
Great. Mindful of the time, if there are no further questions for Ms. Heskey, let's go on to Ms. Cole. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Welcome back.
For the record, Andrea Cohen, Vermont Electric Cooperative. I'll just stick to the handouts. I understand they're online.
Okay.
Great. Thank you for having us in today to discuss S140. You'll see on the first page, that's the inside of our Heinsberg battery, which was installed a few years ago. Just want to give you a look. And on the second page, that's our CEO, Rebecca Town, at the opening, the ribbon cutting of that. We had some local partners, WEG out of Barrie, and then Veridity Energy was also a partner on that. I'll just talk a little bit about what we're doing and what we think about what the study has, and happy to answer questions. I am not the technical expert. I am the translator for our team. I did talk to our experts. I said, okay, here's the study. What do y'all think? Let me know, and I'll bring that information back for your information. So I'm happy to answer what I can. But as I mentioned, we have a community scale battery in Heinsberg, and we consider that community storage. As a co-op, when we do something like that, it's the whole idea is to benefit all of our members, not an individual that has a battery at home, but it's really to benefit all of our members. That project has been operational and it's been going really well. We're using it mostly for peak shaving. We also just got a permit this month in partnership with GMP and with support of Department of Energy to develop another project that's in North Troy. And the goal of that is peak shaving, as well as that Shiite constraint that you're aware of. So it's not operational yet, but we hope it will be before next winter. And I'll just put a pin in that to say, because of the DOE funding, that is why that is a viable project. And I'll talk about some things that are not viable right now. And one of our recommendations about how we all work together. We have another project that's actually on hold right now because it's not penciling out anymore. The cost benefits financially are just not there. And so we're just kind of putting things on hold on that. We are really excited to do as many of these as we can that make sense for, efficiency of the grid and financial efficiency. We also are working with some of our larger members on some commercial scale batteries that they have.
Can you just say very briefly, on the third arrow there, other large scale projects that hold not economic at this time? So what's going on that made that look good at one point and not look so good now?
The developers would probably answer that better, our partners, but the costs have gone up. They're just not seeing the cost benefit, the value right now in terms of the payback to the system.
Okay,
And hopefully that will change.
sure.
Yeah.
And when you say costs, are we mostly talking about equipment costs?
Yeah, well, how we work things with the developers, we do essentially a purchase power agreement for storage, so it's called a BESS. So we essentially get offers for, how much it would cost to develop and manage, and we have to see if we're willing to pay that much, right, in value scale. That's another view of Heinsberg on the third page. People ask what these big batteries look like. They're like roll-off containers. They're really good neighbors. They don't make a lot of noise. There's not a lot of activity. Once it's there, it's just there. So when permitting comes up, it's usually not, it's just more aesthetics, like you want to look at it, but besides that, it's pretty benign, good neighbor.
Do you know what the working lifespan is of a facility like that, like for yourselves as you plan it out as a resource? How long you?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if we have like a 15-year agreement, I believe, on that one.
Okay.
The next page, I just wanted to mention that for us, storage and load management are all part of the same thing. As Anne Margolis was speaking about before, if you have a problem, there's a lot of ways to attack that. And it might be shifting load, right? So we have a home battery management program that we've launched where the member owns the battery and they give us the ability to manage that battery a few times a month, and they opt in. It's totally their choice, and they get financial benefit for letting us use their battery when they don't need it, basically. And we have almost 70 batteries enrolled in that program now. We have some agreements with some commercial members to do some flexible load pilot projects, some partnerships on microgrid, one in Craftsbury. And we're also managing, again, an opt-in program for folks to manage EV charging. Again, we want to avoid the peaks. We want them to charge their car when it's less costly for the grid and both environmentally as well as financially. So the next page, I just wanted to mention, the biggest barriers we see it right now is that financial penciling it out. And it's also the greatest opportunity, right, with these federal dollars and other opportunities. So candidly, we are okay with the study committee. We'd love, we're fine with participating, but we'd actually much rather spend our time trying to access these dollars, right? So if we could all be efficient with, how we're using our time in this space, I think that's really important. We're part of the project that DPS is leading with a statewide proposal for storage, both residential, commercial, and utility scale. We were invited to progress to the next application phase with letter of interest. It's a big ask, big project, and $120 million request. So let's hope for the best on that. That would really be a game changer. I also wanted to emphasize just all the planning and analysis that we're already doing. We have experts that do this every day, all the time. And as Ms. Margolis mentioned, we have this as part of our IRP, our Integrated Resource Plan, where we're looking at all kinds of storage and load management solutions and trying to find the best way to go. And that little chart will just show you over time how that's been increasing for us in terms of actual on-the-ground projects that are starting to really make a difference, both in terms of EV charging, residential batteries, and utility scale batteries.
So you're mentioning your IRP is the one that you've just completed. So is that for 24 to 24, 5, 6?
Right, we just did it in 23. Yes, and it's out of date the second we do it, right?
Yeah.
So that is some of our next comments. So I'm on the testimony comments regarding S140. Our first read, our experts, we look at this, the first read, it seems to assume that more storage is always better. And I think Anne Margot spoke to that. Not always. Where, how much does it cost? How big is it? What does it do? What is the technology? It's really complicated. So just, if we could go into these conversations, understanding that sometimes it's not the right answer. And I think that leads to, hesitancy about any kind of procurement requirements, goals. Like for us, the real goal is to ensure a solid green energy future, improve reliability, keep costs low. That's a little different goal, right? We also, the conversation about environmental considerations, we do want to make sure that's a priority, right? That battery production, use, and disposal, just to understand that and how that fits in. We don't want to shift our nuisances or problems around, right? So that's something to just keep an eye on if we're doing a study. And equity came up. We know income qualified folks are not running out and getting batteries right now, right? We know who has the battery, and who doesn't. And that's why we tend to put our dollars into community scale solutions because it can benefit all of our members. So that's just something, again, to keep in mind. Like when we do our incentives for the battery, the residential, we basically make sure we're not cost shifting that. Like we're compensating you to use your battery fairly in a way that will benefit the whole system. And that's really important to us, that we don't leave people behind as we're doing this. And of course, that just leads into who pays, right? So who pays for any of this? How much it's going to cost and who pays? And it's in our service territory and in a lot of Vermont. That's a very important question to make sure we keep in the forefront. With 60% of our members are on fixed incomes, we've got to talk about who pays for things. And that kind of went into, I saw the word optimal in one of the paragraphs, and I'm like, well, that's interesting because what's optimal for us might be different than folks in this business, different than people looking out for ratepayers, right? So we saw that and we're like, not sure we love that, but we could talk about that some more as you're tweaking language as we're going along. Our big thinkers back at the office, they were like, we got to be thinking far ahead. Like everything we're talking about here is going to be old like tomorrow, like really soon. And so some of we would enjoy getting together and having the conversations. That's why we're open to this, because these new solutions, they're probably not even going to be these home batteries, right? They're, or these utility scale, it's going to be like our vehicles. Some of our big things is it's all about our vehicles. Like that's where we're going to do those vehicle to grid solutions. And, because we all have our cars, why not use them for dual purposes that way? And, that might be where the future is. So being too prescriptive about what the solution is would be limiting, right? We want to be really open to that. The technology keeps changing. The needs on the system keep changing, and the prices definitely are changing all the time. So let's make sure we're staying nimble, we're staying responsive, and we're able to adjust to those changes and avoid having stranded access, putting a lot of money into something that isn't going to be helpful. So if you continue working on this, we'd love to be part of offering some language as you work on this to incorporate some of these kinds of comments and concerns.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good. All right. For that, Mr. Porter. Thank you, Ms. Cohen.
Thank you. Good morning, Louis Porter, General Manager, Washington Electric Co-op. I'll be mercifully brief. Mercifully. You have, Washington Electric's a member-owned cooperative serving about 11,800 meters across the rural parts of 41 Vermont towns. We have 40 employees. I will be brief because I'm definitely not an expert on battery storage. You've heard from people who know a lot more about it than I have, but I am something of an expert on study committees, having observed and caused and been a participant in one since 2005 when I returned to Vermont. So I'll just say that study committees have a cost, and the most significant cost is not in the per diems or the travel time, but in the lost opportunity costs that those people spend on that study committee. And the same people who are going to participate in this study committee are also those who are going to be applying to receive and to spend some of the river of federal money that's going to be flowing past Vermont in the next several years. A lot of it potentially being used on storage. And I don't say that to oppose this study at all. I think information is good. I thought the natural resources world was addicted to data until I moved over to the energy world. It's a whole nother level. So I don't oppose the study. I think information is good. I would just ask that you, as you design the study and as you recognize those opportunity costs of some very smart people, far smarter and more knowledgeable than me, who will participate in the study, that you make sure that you're getting good value for that opportunity cost. And in particular, I'd ask that you think about how this study and our deployment of battery storage, which is certainly important and a necessary and essential part of our grid, one that Washington Electric, I'm sorry to say, is behind on, although we are participants, partners in 2 federal applications to deploy storage. As you think about this study, I would ask you to consider how we can avoid making 2 of the mistakes that we collectively made in the net metering program, which is raising rates in some cases not unnecessarily, and in creating an inequitable system in which Vermonters who are relatively well off are subsidized by those who are less well off in some cases. Net metering has some real value, some real benefit to utilities and to ratepayers. It also has some real cost and some real equity issues. And I would just ask that you explicitly request, direct the members of the study committee, if you pass this bill, to look at how we can deploy battery storage in a way that avoids those 2 problems. So with that, I'll turn you back over to the more knowledgeable people, unless you have questions, which I'd be happy to answer.
Well, I have a quick question. So I appreciate you pointing out the opportunity cost of having people participate, especially when people are already busy. No one was waiting around saying, I hope a study group is created. And you were saying, you make the point of, well, make sure you get good value for the study group. So you raised 2 questions around rate impacts and inequality. What else are you thinking about when you say get good value out of the committee?
I think you need to look at the comprehensive benefits and costs of storage. The least cost elements that the department brought up, and the actual rate impact, as well as the point that Andrea Cohen brought up of who's actually going to pay and who's going to benefit. So those are the general categories I would encourage you to include in the directive to the study committee if you pass them.
Great. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Thank you.
Question for Mr. Porter?
Great. Thank you.
All right. With that, Ms. Whitmire?
I was ready to say.
Or Mr. Wolf, or both?
Hi, I'm Amber Whitmire on behalf of Burlington Electric Department. One of the benefits of going towards the end is most people will cover what you're going to say. But I will just emphasize our main points that we wanted to share. It's unclear to us at this time whether the bill would be necessary, but if it does move forward, we would have some suggestions. First of all, we would want to make sure that all the utilities had a seat at the table, because each utility, even within the municipalities, are so different. It would be important that they're all speaking on behalf of their own needs rather than having those represented by any one party.
Sure.
And going along with the idea of how different the needs are, as Ms. Margolis described, the benefits of storage are so it's not so much that storage itself has an inherent value unless you're deploying it to address a certain problem that you have. So as has already been described, examples of those would be for reliability or peak shaving, because Burlington is different from a number of the other utilities. We haven't seen the customer demand for storage, either at the small scale level or a larger scale level, because we do have such good reliability. We have very few outages. So we don't have the number of customers that are using generators that are interested in switching. We have proactively met with people trying to find a scenario in which we could provide a value stream to encourage storage. There was an RFP that we issued for the airport. I believe it was back in 2018, and none of those proposals ended up working out. I think the one that we were looking at, similar to what Ms. Cohen mentioned, ended up being cost prohibitive because the cost ended up going up. In terms of peak shaving, also, as Ms. Margolis mentioned, there are a number of different ways you can approach that, and storage is often not the most affordable. So for instance, in Burlington, we're already doing some peak shaving programs, including our EV rate, which allows us to manage when EVs are being charged to avoid exacerbating peaks. And then we also have a program called Defeat the Peak, which is kind of a fun way to get customers involved. We let them know in advance when it looks like there's going to be a peak, usually in the summer, and customers voluntarily shift doing like laundry or dishwasher or that kind of thing to the end of the day. And if we do defeat the peak, the money that's saved on behalf of all the customers, a portion of that we donate to an organization in Burlington. So
Can I, a quick question on that one? Are you finding customers less interested, as interested, or more interested than you sort of hoped for in defeat the peak?
That's a good question. I will find out and get back to you on that.
I don't know if it's great, thanks.
Yeah, I've been there about 3.5 years, so I don't have the full story, but I will follow up with it. And another example of something that would be a consideration you'd have to look at in the study would be unless the utility had access to manage the storage, it would not provide benefits to the customers throughout the territory, because so unlike generation, storage can look like either generation or as load. So that could say you had a 1 megawatt facility that could have a range of 2 megawatts in impact on the grid. So if the utility was not able to make sure that that wasn't being charged during the peak, or we would want to be able to have the ability to discharge it when it would be helpful and to not charge it when it would not be helpful. I think Ms. Margolis also mentioned there's an open PUC rulemaking. He's provided a number of, really 3 rounds of comments in that case, and it's still open. So a number of these issues and questions are being looked at in that as well. And I guess it might be useful in the study to clarify what the study would add, or how it would interact with that ongoing rulemaking.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Williams? Thank you very much. And Mr. Wolf.
Thank you. Good morning. It's Jonathan Wolf from Primer Piper, Eggleston and Kramer on behalf of VESA, North Power Supply Authority. Ken Nolan was traveling today and couldn't be here, so he asked that I just make a few comments for him, and any questions I can follow up with and get back to you. It's exciting space. VESA's in the middle of 7 utility scale battery sites under development right now. with 3 different developers, all in the 2 megawatt to 5 megawatt range. And several of these are in the interconnection study phase, and one is nearing filing a complete application. So they're involved in this space. They're also involved, are in the middle of filing multiple grant requests under the IIJA grant RIP program in support of 11 battery locations. That's very interesting. The VEPSA members are also beginning to actively consider what it would take to effectively make their utilities microgrids. And within that discussion is batteries, looking at the long-term batteries as they become more viable and cost-effective towards them. I just wanted to reference, and I think that VEPSA is also simultaneously, while they're doing all this space, is in the midst of deploying technology around energy transition. So thanks to your good work last year with AMI, we are starting to work in that space and get those deployed. There's $8 million in the budget, to remember. If you recall, the VEPSA utilities currently do not have advanced meter infrastructure in their system. So we're working to get those deployed. We're also working on all-bill financing, loan programs, load management pilots, and technology improvements just in general. And I say this as, in a sense, as we talked at S140, and I think like mentioned, this about staffing resources. The same individuals that would be on a study committee would probably be the same individuals that are working towards the sense, whether it's the grant applications on the IIJA front or all these different pilots and programs that we're working on. That said, we appreciate that the bill does have a municipal utility representation on it, as far as the committee on study committee on that. We did want to note that there are 14 municipal utilities, and VEPSA has about 10 of them, and they all are very divergent from the large size and scale scope of our colleague at DED, as well as our smallest ones in Jacksonville. So if this is to move forward, we'd love to be part of that conversation. And love a VEPSA member entity or VEPSA on as utility membership on there, along with the non-VEPSA members, such as a PDD. So we're just kind of same concepts that Andrew talked about, as far as just being a part of the conversation. That was pretty much it. Everyone else touched on everything that we would agree with or talk about. So I wanted to just offer us up as a resource, and if you have any questions, you can always follow back with the people that know much more than I.
So thanks for pinch hitting for Ken.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. Any questions for Mr. Wolf? All right. So when you have the advantage of we're all getting tired now, so there's fewer questions left. All right. Okay. Well, thanks so much. So we are going to change topics entirely, and we'll have council back in to do S100. We have amendments to our floor report, and we need to vote that out so that it can get into the calendar, so that everything can roll out on the floor relatively smoothly. So thanks to all our guests this morning on battery storage.
Are we taking a short recess?
Let's take
Let's keep the door open.